Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're in the midst of BeHa'alot'cha, and it is a parsha, the third parsha in the book of Numbers. And there's a passage that we have paused, which has two upside down nuns around two verses. And it seems as if that is a point at which the feeling of numbers changes. And here already in this particular place here, we have the people complaining about the manna. They have people that start to complain and give Moses a terrible time. And God tells Moses not to worry, essentially, and that he is going to feed them. He's going to take them. Okay. Moses, in this particular verse, questions God and says, how are you going to be capable of doing this? Right. And that they're going to be eating for a month. How much food for 600,000? And this is talking about, right, they were counted. And so we're talking about 600,000 men 20 years and up. And I'm going to go ahead at this point and make the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So here he goes on with his questioning God. Hatzon uvakar, if sheep and cattle yishachet lahem were to be slaughtered for them, umatzah lahem, and there was enough for them, it was found for them. It called the Gay Hayam Yasef lahem, were all the fish of the sea to be gathered for them. Umatzah lahem. So Umatzah lahem is actually a question. It's saying, would enough be found for them? So he is obviously Moses is doubting whether this can happen, whether all these people can be fed. So here we are. Hatzon uvachar, right? Yishachet, were to be slaughtered. And this is from the Sifrei. Ze echad me'arba'ad varim. This is an example of one of the four places, Shahaya Rabbi Akiva Doresh, which Rabbi Akiva would interpret, Ve'ein Rabbi Shimon Doresh Kamoto, and Rabbi Shimon does not interpret the way Rabbi Akiva interprets it. So how does Rabbi Akiva understand this? Rabbi Akiva Omer. So Rabbi Akiva says, Shesh Moed Elef Ragli, saying basically that Moses was saying to him, 600,000 foot soldiers. Va'ata amarta basar eten lahem va'achlu chodesh ve'amim. And you said, God, that I will give them flesh and they will eat it for a month of days, a full month, in other words. Moses goes on to say, Hatsan uvakar, were sheep and cattle, etc. Hakol kamashma'or. In other words, just as you're hearing it. In other words, just as it seems to imply. Miyaspik lahem, will there be enough for them? Ki'inyan shneimar, similar to what is said in Leviticus 25, umatzah kadei ke'ulato. If you find enough, right, there's the matzah here, the matzah. Well, if he finds enough to redeem him, he has enough to redeem the servant. So in other words, matzah here normally means to find, but in this case, it means to have sufficient, right? Will there be sufficient for them? The Ezu Kashor, so, and goes on to say, Rabbi Akiva goes on, I believe, to say, the Ezu Kasher, and which is the more kasher means hard, but in this case means disrespectful. So, this particular statement, where Moses is questioning God's abilities, right, is this which is more disrespectful, or looking forward into Numbers chapter 20, Shim'u na Hamorim, where he engages the Israelites and says, listen, 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 O ye rebels, right? And that's got to do with the water. And he says, shall I be able to bring water from the rock? And which do you think is a greater challenge to God? Which sounds more impudent? And I think what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that questioning God, whether God is capable of feeding these people, is more impudent than what Moses was saying when he struck the rock. Ella, however, the lo amar barabim, because he did not make this first statement, this more impudent statement or disrespectful statement publicly. He didn't say it publicly. He said it personally in his own meditations before God. Chisech lo hakatov. So for that reason, Scripture was merciful to him. He never got punished. Moses did not get punished for this. V'lo nifra mimenu, and he did not punish him. Meriva, however, what he said to the Israelites publicly at Meriva, at the waters of Riva, hata begalui, it was open, it was right there in public. Lefichach lo chisech lo akatuv, and for that reason, the Scripture did not overlook that. And of course, Moses was told he would never enter the Promised Land as a result of that. So that's how Rabbi Akiva understands this. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, lo alta al da'ato shel oto tzadik kach, right? How could you say that Moses would say such things, that he would even think such things? He was such a righteous man. Misha katuv bo, concerning whom is written, in other words, regarding Moses, it's written, again, this is Numbers chapter 12, B'chol beiti ne'eman. This is the incident where Aaron and Miriam come and complain about Moses, right? And God says to them, basically, throughout my house, he is faithful. He is to be trusted. Ne'emanhu, he is to be trusted. Yomar ein hamakom maspik, should such a person who is fully faithful, we're told he's fully faithful in the eyes of God. How can we say that he would say, Ein hamakom maspik lanu, that God is not going to be able to take care of all our needs? Ela kach amar. But this is what Moses was saying. Shesh me'ot elef ragli, etc., 600,000 foot soldiers, etc. Va'ata amarta basar eten lechodesh yamim, and you said that you will give them meat for a full 30 days, for a month of day, full month. Va'achar kach tarog uma gedola kazu, and then you're telling me, or I know that you're going to kill this entire people, this great people. You're going to kill them. Hatzon uvakar ishachet lahem. Are you saying that you would slaughter cattle and sheep, or sheep and cattle slaughtered for them? Kadesh yahargu, in order that they should be killed. In other words, they're all going to be killed ultimately. But achila zo mispekatan ad olam, and you're going to say that this particular food, eating that they're going to have should be sufficient forever. That this is really what you want to do. And here we go. V'chi shivchachahu zeh. Okay. And can you say that this kind of thing, that if this happens to them, that this is to your praise? Omrim lo lechamor. Do you say to a donkey, tol kur sa'arim, take a ton of barley, right? V'nachtoch roshcha, okay, and then afterwards, we're going to cut off your head. Hashivu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Holy One, basically, he replied to him, Ve'im lo eten. The point is this. It's true, they're going to deserve to die, but if they don't give them the food, as I'm saying, Yomru, they're going to say, Shekatzra Yadi, right? They're going to say, it's because I wasn't capable of it, that God wasn't capable of doing this. And that, in fact, is why he killed them. Hatov be'einecha, would it be better in your eyes, yad Hashem tiktzar be'einehem, that they should hold that God isn't capable of providing for them sufficiently? Yovduhem, okay, let them perish. Va'ata, and now kiyotze bahem, and whatever is kiyotze bahem, in other words, and now I believe what he's saying is this: whatever follows follows. Va'al tehi adik tzara. So, in other words, so you can say what you said, your argument that you give, but don't say that I wasn't capable of feeding them lifnehem ktzaveim, afilu sha'achad, even for one moment. Okay. So basically, the way Rabbi, excuse me, let me find it. Okay, that Rabbi Shimon says that it isn't to be understood simply as it is written, but we should understand that when Moses was questioning God, his question was whether it was just for God to do what he was doing, and whether or not that's how that he should feed the people and then kill them. Right then, of course, and I think here he's referring to ultimately to the 40 years of wandering where the entire nation died off. So that's the argument he's using here, according to Rabbi Shimon. Going on. Let's see. Here we go. Up here. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So God said to Moses, Hayad Hashem tiktzar. Can you say that God's hand is short? In other words, that God isn't capable he doesn't have the power to fulfill what he promised? Ata tir'eh, you will now see, hayik recha dvarai imlo, whether my words will happen to you or not. Okay, so we need a Rashi on this to explain this. What does it mean will happen to you? Atatire hayikarcha dvarai, right? Will happen to you. My words will happen to you. Rabban Gamliel, bno shel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Omer, he says, I efshar la'amod al hatafel. All right, so this is the thing that you can't hold an argument against false charges. They're not good charges. In other words, if someone's charging you and saying, basically what they were saying is that God, that they were complaining about God not giving them food that they wanted, right? So it's saying, you can't satisfy people when they start doing that. Because the truth is, all they're really seeking is a pretext in which to not do God's commandments, things like that, just to reject God. They're looking for an excuse, is what's going on. And this is what God was saying to Moses. Lo taspik lahem, right? He says, you're not going to satisfy them. Sofan ladun acharecha, they will still judge you harshly. Imata noten lahem basar behema. Here we go. If you were to give them basar behema, if you give them meat, gasa yom behema gasa. If you give them meat from a large animal, meaning like from a cow. Amru dakabikashna. No, we really wanted mutton. In other words, we wanted lamb chops. You gave us beefsteak. We wanted lamb chops. And if you give them lamb chops, no, we really wanted steaks. Bakashnu. Chayava off, if you were to give them from beast, basically, for off or birds, right? Bakashnu dagim v'chabavim, right? But yeah, chayava off, bakashnu dagim v'chavagim bakashnu. So he's saying, again, going through this, whatever you say, they'll say, well, we really wanted fish, or we wanted insects. That's what really we wanted. Amar lo, im kain. If this is the case, Yomru shekatzra yadi, and if this is the case, they're gonna be able to have this excuse that this God wasn't able, didn't have the power to do this. Amar lefanav. So Moses said to God, Hareini hiluch mefaisan. Don't, he says, don't worry. Moses says to God, don't. I'm gonna go and I am gonna appease them. Amar lo, so God said to him, Atati hayikarcha dvarai. And this is what God was saying when he said to Moses, you're going to see that my words are going to come. My words of telling you, they will not be satisfied. You can't appease them. In fact, will happen to you. Shelo yishma'u lecha. That is to say, they are not going to listen to you. They're not going to be satisfied. Halach Moshe lefaisan. So Moses went to appease them. And he says in parentheses, this is an editorial note that's saying this also applies to the Rashi that we read above, right? Where it was still also talking about whether or not God was capable of doing these things. Amar lahem. So Moses said to them, Hayad Hashem tiktzar. He said to them, are you going to say that God isn't capable, doesn't have the power to do what he said he was going to do? And then he quotes a passage from Psalms 78. It's coincidental, of course, but this is the point here. Hein Hikatsur. This is a psalm that references the complaints of the Israelites in the wilderness. And he says, if God was able to strike a rock, Vayazuvu Mayim, and waters flowed, etc. In other words, what's more difficult, feeding them for the month or seeing water gush forth from a rock, from a hard rock, etc. Hagam lechem yuchal tate. He says, he's certainly capable of giving you sufficient food. Amru Sharahi. They said to him, you're just looking for a compromise position. It isn't really a good argument, is I believe what they're saying. Sharahi zu. This what you're saying to us. It's just trying to argue, but it's a rationalization. Ein bo koach. He doesn't have the capability, God doesn't have the capability of fulfilling our request. And this is referenced by a statement where it says, Vayetzem Moshe vayedaber, because it says right afterwards, it says, Moses went out and spoke Ela'am to the people. In other words, here that sentence is referring to his desire to appease them, is saying to God, I will go and appease them. Kevan shelo sham'ulo, and then, of course, when they didn't pay attention to him, they didn't listen to him, vayesaf shivim ish. He then went and gathered 70 men, etc., as will follow. So, let's go on. Here we are. Vayetzei Moshe, Vaydaber Ela'am. Moses went out and he spoke to the people, et divrei Hashem, God's words. Vayesof shivim, and ish miziknei ha'am, and he gathered 70 men from the elders of the people. So the way we're understanding this now, right, is that there is this Vayesof is, we should understand that they didn't pay attention to him, and that's why he gathered the 70 men. Vaya'amed otam svivot ha'oil, and he placed them around the tent. Let's see here. Okay. Looking to see. Okay. All right. Going on. Vayered Hashem ba'anan, the Lord came down in a cloud, Vaydaber elav, and spoke to him, Vayatzel min haruach asher alav, and he drew out from the spirit that was upon him, Vayiten el shivim ish hazkenim, and he gave it to the 70 elders, Vahi kenoach aleihem haruach, and when the spirit of God rested upon them, Vayitnabu velo yasafu, they prophesied. Velo yasafu, I see that, and looking at the translation, there's, I think, a difference of opinion. Velo yasafu means they did not continue, But if you look at it, it says in the Aramaic, "Umitnab in," and they prophesied. Velo paskin means they didn't cease. They didn't cease from prophesying here. But let's take a look and see. Okay. Okay. We'll let it go at that for now. Just going on. Let's see, make sure I have covered everything here. Here, okay. So this Rashi does understand Yasafu, unless I'm mistranslating the Aramaic, right? Lo nitabu ela oto hayom levado. They only prophesied for that one day. So he goes on. So you can see here, Kach mefurash besifrei. That is what is explained in the Sifrei, that he understands the lo yasafu as they didn't continue. But here, look at this. The Onkelos Tirgame. However, Onkelos translates this as the lo safkin. That is, shelo safkan nevuah mehem. So he understands it as that the prophecy did not go away from them, that they always had that ability. So as I said, it's interesting that we have a very ancient disagreement as to how to translate this particular word. Going on. Vayisha'aru shnei anashim b'machaneh. So there remained in the camp 2 men. Remember, there were 70 that Moses had selected, and there were 2 men out in the camp. Shem ha'echad Eldad. One of them was called Eldad, v'shem hasheni Medad, and the second one was named Medad. V'tanach alehem haruach, and the Spirit rested upon them. V'hem bakituvim, right? And they were amongst those who were recorded. V'lo yatzu ha'ohela, and ohela. But they did not go out to the tent of meeting. Vayitnabu, and they continued b'machaneh, and they were prophesying in the camp. So they weren't part of the 70, but they were prophesying as well. So let's take a look how we understand this. Vayisharu shnei anashim, 2 men remained. Me'otan shenivcharu, from those who were selected. That is, in other words, where it says they were counted. Amru, they said, that is, Eldad and Medad said, Einan eino keda'in legdulazo. They said, we are not worthy of such an honor of being counted among these 70 people, right? Even though they were named as amongst the rest. Vehem baktuvim, right? Shemevurarim shebahem, the Sanhedrin, amongst those that have been selected for the Sanhedrin. Venichtavu kulan nikuvin b'shemot, and all of them were written down. They were recorded. They were specified by name, right? Al Yedei Goral, and then using a lottery is basically what we're taking. Okay, Lefi she chashvun, right? Let's make sure we got this. You can see the words kind of messed up, but it's chashvun. Okay, sorry, cheshbon. Forgive me. Lefi Lefi cheshbon, because the number, right, according to counting, ole leyud bit, right. So we're talking about if we're taking 6 people from 12 tribes, that comes to 74. Right? So, Leyud bit shvatim, for 12 tribes, shisha l'chol shevet. If you take 6 men from each tribe, right, you wind up with 72, and yet there were only supposed to be 70. So, okay. Chutz mibnei shvatim she'ein magia alehem, right? Ela chamisha. So they're going to be two tribes, right? If you're going to have only 70 and you're supposed to take six from each tribe, that's going to come to too many. So there are going to be two tribes that are only going to have five representatives. Chamisha, Chamisha. Okay. Amar Moshe, but Moses thought, Ein Sheva Chomea li lefachot mishivto zaken echad. There's no tribe that's going to say, oh yeah, that's fine. You can just take five representatives from me. No tribe is going to do that, right? So how do you resolve this particular conflict? Ma'asa was a me'asa. What did he do? What did Moses do? Natal ayin betakim. So he took 72 pieces of note, right? Like notes, little note papers. The katav al shiv'im zaken, and on 70 he wrote the word zaken, meaning an elder, right? V'al shnayim chalak, and two of them had nothing on them. These two little pieces had nothing on them. Uvarar mikol shevet v'shevet shisha, and he, from each tribe, he selected six elders. V'hayu ayin bet, and so now you had 72 elders. Amar lahem, so now he said to them, Tlu ptakechem mitoch kalpi. He said, okay, now go and pick out a piece of paper, right, from this jar. Misha Allah biyado zaken nitkadesh. So if in fact you pulled out a piece of paper and it said zaken, okay, so you were selected as a zaken. Or Misha Allah biyod chalak, and if you picked out a piece of paper, just probably wasn't paper, but you understand what I'm saying, okay? That it was smooth, okay? Okay, so if it doesn't say zaken, you're not a an elder. Amar lo hamakom lo chafetz ba. So he said to them, God doesn't want you as an elder. You're not being selected. So using this lottery, okay, the way of using a lottery, that's the way in which he got 70 when actually there were 72 people from each tribe, six from each tribe. So that is going to be it for now. But we've got Eldad. So this is why Eldad and Medad did not consider themselves to be worthy of this particular honor. And here we read that they kept prophesying and they were out in the camp to do this. So let's see what we're going to do. We'll mark the place for tomorrow. And sadly, this is just one example. This is going to be one example of the problems Moses is going to have with the Jewish people until he gets to the land of, up to the land of Canaan. So, any thoughts for the record? Lauren, Mike. Yeah.
Interesting. I think Ham is very interesting.
Mike, I'm so sorry, but it's really muddled. We can't make out what you're saying. So it's breaking up. So let me ask you, Lauren, were you familiar with this story? I can't. You muted?
You mean about Medad
Yes.
or the whole big? I
The
mean,
whole
I,
bit. Yes.
I mean, I've certainly. I
Right.
don't know if I've done the Rashi on it. I definitely
Right.
have read it more than once.
Right. Sure. Sure. So we'll see how he responds to Joshua later on next time, probably tomorrow. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.